here's my plan for tonight. As I was saying, this is a follow-up to an earlier meeting we had. I'm not going to go into too much background, but I want to address and critique Zionism, the history of Zionism, because we've been, here we go. Can we full screen it? Or is that,
Yeah.
and then can you move to the next slide? Okay, so this is a turning point. So I've been involved in this since the early 2000s. I know a number of you here are Palestinian, you've been involved all your life. But we've never seen such levels worldwide in the United States and worldwide of solidarity with Palestine. So we are, this global intifada of solidarity is really something much bigger. It's a catalyst for something much bigger. Next, please. And I want to start by saying that this genocide we're seeing now, these genocidal pressures are built into Zionism. This moment would have come anyway. There's only two things that could have avoided the genocidal confrontation that we have right now. Either the defeat of Zionism, and again, I'm going to go into considerable detail on what Zionism is, or the end of US unconditional support and sponsorship of Israel and of Zionism. And by the way, have no doubt, within 24 hours, this genocide could come to an end if that decision was made by Washington, by the US government. Next one, please. Okay. So we are speaking in important language that the Zionists are weaponizing anti-Semitism. But is there any way to get it off the screen?
You know what? I don't know.
It's okay.
Does somebody here know?
Right. But I think we need, I suggest that we need a stronger head-on confrontation with the Zionist narrative and Israel's legitimizing myths and discourses. For all of these years, the Zionists have been allowed to establish the discourse and establish the narrative. And we've been, meaning those of us in solidarity with Palestine, or those of us simply understanding this issue, are just now taking a head-on confrontation. Okay. Anti-Semitism, as we know, is discrimination against or prejudice and hatred of Jews, which has absolutely nothing to do with the critique of Zionism, but I want to go more into a deeper analysis of that critique. Next one, please. Okay. Hezbollah, Israeli Hezbollah, we just saw it in the YouTube, that Hezbollah is the Hebrew word for public perception, well, which is a very nice way of saying propaganda. And really, the Zionist Hezbollah, I'm going to suggest, is the most powerful propaganda machinery on earth. It involves psychological and political operations that bombard the US and the world public. And if the Israel lobby, it's not just the most powerful lobby in the United States, because it's more than a lobby. A lobby are when people, corporations, or individuals spend money to lobby legislatures in Washington. Of course, the Zionist lobby does that, but it's much deeper than that. The Israel lobby is literally fused into the US political system, the US corporate order, into the US civil society, on our campuses, no matter where we go. It's integrated fully into all of the different institutions in the United States, and for that matter, worldwide, especially in the United States and the Western countries. And it is so ingrained and so profound that journalists, politicians, academics, and even activists self-censor in the face of this narrative that it has been putting forward. And in fact, this is the exact intention of the current unprecedented wave of repression and of criminalization of the Palestine solidarity movement, is specifically to create that chilling atmosphere where we will continue to self-censor. The IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, the Foreign Ministry, and when the YouTube showed that the Foreign Ministry has organized this highest level campaign on our campuses. These ministries all have Hezbollah branches. The IDF, Mossad, has Hezbollah branches, and they have literally dozens of front organizations here in the United States that pass as legitimate organizations. The American-Israeli Political Action Committee, AIPAC, that you've heard so much about, and which is spending $100 million on the elections this year to defeat candidates that are critical of Israel and condemning this genocide, and to put in place candidates who will continue the US sponsorship of the Zionist project. And you've all heard of the Anti-Defamation League. That was the organization in 2008, 2009 that launched the attack against me. But there are dozens of others, and there are at least 7, 8, 9 of these organizations specifically dedicated to US university campuses to squash and crush and destroy anyone that speaks out against Zionism. So here's the thing, and I'm going to go into detail on this. Anti-Zionism is not only not anti-Semitism, but the history of Zionism is a history of anti-Semitism. When we say, as Joshua in his introduction, and as we've been saying, the fate of Palestine now is the fate of all of us, that is not just rhetoric. Fascist forces are organizing around the world in the face of the global crisis and right here in the United States. Those fascist forces are anti-Semitic, and those fascist forces are pro-Zionist and pro-Israel. The incredible irony here that there was a march, you remember, in 2017 that Take Back the Right, what was it called? Take Back the Night. What was it? What was it called? Unite the Right. The Unite the Right March. Those were Zionists. And the irony is that some of these far right-wing fascist forces march with one banner with the Nazi swastika and the other banner with the Israeli flag. Those are the anti-Semites, and those are the ones organizing fascism here in the US and organizing to deepen the support for Israel and to destroy us who are against this genocide. No, there are not two warring sides, any more than we can say the struggle against apartheid in South Africa were two warring sides in which blacks and whites were fighting each other. This is not a war of two warring sides at all. It's not an Israel-Palestine conflict. Again, any more than we would have said that the Nazi Holocaust was a Nazi-Jewish conflict. Nothing of the sort. That's the wrong framing. That's the framing that we've been given and that we need to break with. Okay. No, Israel, and this is a hard one for some of you to swallow maybe, no, Israel does not have a, quote, right to defend itself, which is one of the most fundamental slogans put forward by the Zionist project to intimidate us. We would not have said, when we were all fighting against the apartheid regime in South Africa, that the apartheid regime has a right to defend itself. And we should not be saying that a Zionist project of racism, apartheid, and now genocide has the right to defend itself. But that's not even the key point. The key point is that in international law, a country has a right to defend itself from external aggression. And in this case, the Palestinians are not an external aggression. They're in their homeland. No, Jews are not a people. We know the history, Judaism, and I'm going to go into detail on this. I may be shocking some of you. Judaism is a religion that brings together diverse cultures, diverse peoples, diverse histories from diverse places around the world. Okay. It was turned into a people by the Zionist project. It's something all bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Better.
Yeah.
Okay. And no, Israel is not a democracy. It's an illegal apartheid state, literally an outlaw state. I believe that there is no other country in the world that has violated more United Nations resolutions systematically and brazenly. An outlaw state. Next slide, please. Okay. So now I want to go into more detail here. It's good that we're pointing out that the genocidists, thank you, are weaponizing anti-Semitism, but now we need to deepen the critique of anti-Semitism. So this is the part of our Boyle Heights activity that we had in January that I retained for this PowerPoint. So here's the thing. This comparison of Zionism, Nazism, fascism, genocide, to make those comparisons has been turned into a taboo. In fact, even activists are scared to do that. And yet, and by the Zionist propaganda and intimidation machinery, but historically, empirically, it is analytically accurate. This is one thing that I wrote in late 2008 in the midst of Operation Cast-Lead, which, as Joshua pointed out, left 1,400 Palestinians dead, thousands more injured, destroyed significant portions of Gaza. This is what I stated at the time, and this is why the Zionist lobby came after me, and I nearly lost my job. Zionists and defenders of the Israeli state take great offense at any analogy between the Nazis and Israeli state actions, including the charge of genocide, in part because the Jewish Holocaust is used by the Israeli state and the Zionist political project as a mechanism of colonial legitimation, so that to draw such analogies is to undermine Israel's legitimate discourse. It is crucial to point this out because that discourse now legitimates Israeli genocide. Next slide, please. Okay. So we need to break that taboo, especially now when anti-Zionism is being criminalized by the US government. You may know that the US Congress just passed a so-called Anti-Semitic Awareness Act, and it's probably going to be signed into law by Biden. And that act says that if we criticize Israel, if we critique Zionism, we're anti-Semitic and we're violating US law. They are criminalizing us, they're coming after us in a big way, and we instead of retreating, we need head-on to confront that. And this is part of that confrontation. Zionism has always been a proto-fascist ideology, a close cousin of Nazism. Zionists are allied with anti-Semitites historically and now. Historically and now. Israel, what has happened here is that we had an historical definition of anti-Semitism, which I want to repeat, is discrimination against or hatred and prejudice against Jews. We are enemies of anti-Semitism. The Zionists historically embraced anti-Semitism. Now that sounds weird, but it is not weird. This is the history and this is the reality of the intentionally repressed from us. So one of the big battles that Israel has waged successfully has been to change that definition, to change it to mean criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic, to mean that criticism of Zionism as a right-wing political project having nothing to do with Judaism is anti-Semitic. And they took that battle worldwide with the backing, of course, of the US and United States government and the other Western powers. And they took it to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which was formed, I believe, in 2000, 2001 by the Swedish government. It was originally a good plan because this had to do with not forgetting the Nazi Holocaust.
That one worse.
It's not working?
I don't know, is that one worse?
It works. It's okay. Directional.
You can still like,
I don't get to speak directly into it.
is it okay?
Otherwise, it struggles to speak to you.
Okay. So, and can we check that the people who need to hear okay? Okay. So Israel goes to this International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and it lobbies to change the definition of anti-Semitism. It lobbies successfully. So they rewrite the definition of anti-Semitism that's adopted by the US government in 2010 and 2016. It's adopted by 31 states around the world. So this was part of the very Israeli Hasbara to change that definition and get the new definition legitimated worldwide. And we need to fight that head on. So the images on the left, I know it's hard to see in the back. On the left, of course, is the Warsaw Ghetto. Gaza is Israel's Warsaw. And you can see the wall right there. On the right is actually the apartheid wall in outside Bethlehem in the West Bank. Next slide, please. Okay. So I'm going to go into just a little bit of history. Again, I was asked by the organizers to move more to the current situation, which I'm going to get to, but I don't want to leave the history fully out. Of course, you recognize this map of the world, and Palestine has always been, because of its strategic location in the entire old world, Palestine has always been a crossroad of empires and of civilizations, constantly passing through, constantly imposing their authority, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Persian, etc., and Egyptian, etc., etc. But the thing that really changes in the 20th century with the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, because now the new empire, the new colonization is going to be the British, and this time it is going to represent world capitalism, modern day imperialism and capitalist colonization. So this is a different type of colonialism, a different type of empire, which will lead, of course, to this genocide that we're experiencing today. So this colonization of Palestine, which takes place by the British, which takes place between 1960 to 1920, up until 1947, That is in the context of the heyday of European colonial expansion, late 1930s and 20th century colonial expansion. Latin America had been colonized, it achieved its independence, but was still under the control of the centers of world capitalism. And look at the rest of the world. This is the wave of late 19th, early 20th century colonization, and Palestine is colonized. So Palestine isn't a unique case. It's part of this colonization and conquest of Africa, of Asia, of the Middle East in the late 19th, early 20th century. The Zionist movement, which I'm going to get to in just a moment, realizes if they want to succeed in their projects of colonizing Palestine, they need to ally with Western imperialism, with Western colonialism. So you have an alliance of Zionism and imperialism, and that leads to the creation of the state of Israel in 1948. And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail. And by the way, we will questions and discussions and debate, we can go into more of this detail. But the Israel is founded as an outpost of post-World War II world capitalism. Next slide, please. So what exactly is Zionism? We need to click it a few times for that. It goes line by line, my mistake. So Zionism is originally a far-right, racist, proto-fascist political ideology, which emerges among a small minority of Eastern European Jews in the late 1800s. It's not hegemonic, meaning the vast majority of Jews don't want anything to do with Zionism. They have other plans, other projects, other political struggles. And up until the 1930s, it's the Nazi Holocaust which propels Zionism to become the hegemonic ideology among Jews in Europe. But Zionism is part of the late 19th century wave of what was known as racial nationalism. Racial nationalism argued that every person on the world belongs to a biologically pure race, and every biologically pure race is supposed to have their own country where only those biologically pure racial people are supposed to inhabit, and everyone else should leave and go to their own biologically pure racial homelands. That is racial nationalism, and that's what gave birth to Zionism. And that is what gave birth to Nazism. This is the same origins for Zionists and for Nazi ideology. It's also what gave us manifest destiny here in the United States. So 1897, Vienna is the first Zionist Congress. Theodor Herzl is the founder of the Zionist movement. He publishes his book in 1896, The Jewish State, calling for a Jewish state somewhere in the world. Now, Herzl said, let's set it up in Uganda. Let's set it up in Argentina. I don't care where, as long as we have a racially pure Jewish state. Other Zionists said, wait a minute, we need to legitimate this project with the Bible. So we have to stick with Palestine. And so they started focusing on Palestine. Zionist ideology, that is going to say that the history of Palestine is suspended with the Roman conquest of the Jewish kingdom in 70 AD. This is what we call a foundational myth, an allegory of Jewish dispersal, and in what we call sociologically implanted memory. You implant this memory in world Judaism, that you originated in Palestine, that 2,000 years ago you were expelled, you've been wandering around the world, and now you come back home to the Zionist project. So as I said previously, Jews are no more Judaism as a religion, a faith communities. Jews did not have a common history, a common language, nor a territory. They had inhabited for centuries. Again, in this presentation, I'm not going into a lot of details, but there were Jews in what is today Yemen, in southern Arabia. There were Jewish communities in Morocco. There were Moroccan culture. There were Jewish communities in Palestine. There were Jewish communities in Iran or Persia that spoke Persian. This is a faith community, just like Christianity. We don't say Christians are a people. There's Christians in China. There's Christians in Argentina. There's Christians in South Africa. We don't say Buddhists are a people. So the Zionist project was to create this consciousness of the people and say we now have to go back to Israel. But there's only one problem. In order to do that, you have to get rid of the Palestinians who have been there for thousands of years. And in fact, I wasn't planning to talk so much about this, but I do want to say that when we study the history over the last 2,000 years, we see that the spread of Islam in the 600s and 700s spread into what is today Israel, and most people converted from Judaism or Christianity to Islam. And so today's Palestinians who are being genocided in Gaza, Many of them were 2,000 years ago Jews. So in late 1800s, the Zionists invented this historic myth of the Jewish people and Jewish homeland to justify that colonial project. This is an exact parallel with the Nazi myth of the Aryan nation. What did the Nazis say? Germans are a pure racial people, the Aryan people. And their particular homeland is Germany, and everyone else, especially the Jews, should be expelled. But in order to claim this state and colonize Israel, the Zionists had to create the myth of Jewish people exiled, now returning to their original homeland and resuming history. Next slide, please. So I want to really, this may shock you, and it should. This is the information that's suppressed from us. Zionism is this, as its racial national ideology, is classically scientific racism. We critique here in the United States the scientific racism that emerges in the early to mid 1800s. And this is the Zionist version of classical racism, in which the Zionist ideology considers the Jewish nation to be a biological entity that gives substance to national demands. So if Theodore Herzl is the political father of Zionism in the late 1800s, the intellectual father is Sam Jabotinsky. And he writes in 1936, let me read this, Jews have a distinctive blood that sets them apart from other people. It is quite clear that the source of the national sentiment cannot be found in education, but in something that precedes it. In what? In the blood. The sense of national identity is inherent in man's blood, in his physical racial type. And only in that it is physically impossible for a Jew descended from several generations of pure, unmixed Jewish blood to adopt the mental state of a German or a Frenchman, just as it is impossible for a Negro to cease to be a Negro. And he continues, this is all his quotes, the intellectual founder of Zionism. The essence of a nation is its special physical attribute, the formula of its racial composition. In the final analysis, when all shells arising from history and climate, natural surroundings, and outside influences have been removed, the nation is reduced to its racial kernel. So this is classic scientific racism. And if you say, oh, well, that was just the 1930s, no. Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Zionist social scientists, today, 2024, say they discovered a Jewish gene. And I'm not joking. Next slide, please. So we do critique, by definition, Zionism is apartheid, but this is why we need a head-on confrontation with the Zionist narrative, more head-on than we've been doing so far. This is half the battle. That narrative is cracking, as I mentioned in the YouTube, but we have to finish that crack. So this was the Prime Minister of South Africa. And he himself said the Jews took Israel from the Arabs after the Arabs had lived there for 1,000 years. And that I agree with them. Israel, like South Africa, is an apartheid state. We know that. Here's what you may not know. That he was invited for an official state visit to Israel in the early 1970s. And here's what you probably don't know. He was a self-declared Nazi. A former Nazi sympathizer, commander of the fascist Volkswagen that sided with Hitler. The Afrikaner population that came to power in 1948, the same year that Israel was created. That Afrikaner population established the apartheid regime. And that Afrikaner population had, the leaders, had aligned officially with the Nazis. So the Israeli government fights for an official state visit to Israel, a Nazi, a well-known Nazi. I'm going into this detail because here you can see the exact reverse of the Zionist narrative. The US government narrative is the actual reality, literally the reverse. Next, please. So I'm near concluding this because I want to get to the current contemporary situation, but again, now we need to locate why did this become successful? The Zionist project. And that's where the linkage between Zionism, colonialism, and imperialism comes into the story. The Zionist position is that it was futile to fight anti-Semitism in Europe. Here is Herzl's own words. I achieved a clear attitude towards anti-Semitism, which I began to understand historically and to pardon. Above all, I recognized the emptiness and futility of trying to combat anti-Semitism. Now, the US President, Biden, he says he's a Zionist. We need to be clear, when he says that, he's saying, I'm an anti-Semite. After Hitler came to power, the German Zionists liked that. They wrote a memo to Hitler expressing Zionism's the exact quote, hope for collaboration on the assumption that its aims, the Nazi aims, the separation of Jews from Gentiles, were similar to theirs. Why are they saying this? Their goal, remember, Jews are a biologically pure race that have to go to Palestine in a biologically pure Jewish-only state. And the Nazis are saying the Jews have to leave. That coincided perfectly with the Zionist program. And so when the Jews start to flee and want to go to the England and the United States, those anti-Semitic governments say, we don't want Jews here. You can't come in. The Zionists lobbied the UK government to block Jews from entering so that there was no other option other than for the European Jews to escape Nazism by going to Palestine. And it's only then that significant Jewish-Palestinian tensions arise in Palestine. Why? Because those Jewish refugees are now arriving under the banner of Zionism, which says, its famous slogan, a land without a people for a people without a land. Now, I want to go back to the universe in the sense that this is the project of racial nationalism aligning with colonialism and imperialism. And it's not just here, remember, here meaning in Palestine. Remember that when the United States was colonized, there was genocide against the indigenous. But that colonization also had the same myth. North America, United States, had 20 million indigenous in the 1500s. That was reduced to 300,000 in 1892. And how was that legitimated? The colonizers that arrived here said this is an empty land waiting to be civilized. That is the ideology of racial nationalism, the ideology of colonialism. When the British got to Australia, there were millions of Aboriginals, but the British said, no one is here, just waiting for us to conquer. When the Nazis invaded into Eastern Europe, starting with Poland, they said, and I forgot the German word for it, this is empty land waiting for us to bring civilization to it. So this is the general ideology of fascist colonialism and imperialism, and that is Zionism for Palestine. So this is what leads to the creation of the state of Israel. One more click, please. Thank you. So again, the 19th century new wave of European colonial conquest around the world. That's the context here. Herzl and the other Zionists say that the Jewish state has to be built under the wings of a powerful European countries that must serve European interests in this new era of imperialism and colonialism. So the first Zionist Congress that took place in 1897, it charges Herzl. It says, Herzl, you go find an imperial backer. And so Herzl goes to the German Kaiser. Says, you want to back us in colonizing Palestine? He said, no. Then he goes to the Tsar. Now, I want you to remember what's going on in Russia. Pogroms against Jews. The Russian Tsar is extremely anti-Semitic, using Jews as a scapegoat, marching into villages and slaughtering Jews who have to flee. But Herzl goes there. So Tsar, let's have an alliance. The Tsar says no. Then he goes to the Pope. He goes to the Pope and says, let's have an alliance. Pope says no. Finally, he focuses Herzl on the expanding British Empire. And here's what Herzl writes in his diary. England, with her possessions in Asia, should be most interested in Zionism for the shortest route to India by way of Palestine. England's great politicians were the first to recognize the need for colonial expansion. This is why Great Britain's ensign flies on all the oceans. And so I must believe that here in England, the idea of Zionism, which is a colonial idea, should be easily and quickly understood. That's what Herzl says. And then he asks, listen carefully, the anti-Semites will become our most dependable friends and anti-Semitic countries our allies. So British colonial minister Joseph Chamberlain, he agrees now with Herzl. We're going to offer you a colony anywhere in the world, now to quote indirectly, in the English possessions where there were no white people as of yet. So European Jewish settler colony now becomes a British and a Western strategy for imperial control of the Middle East at a time when the Middle East is part of the worldwide decolonization process, becoming independent nations. And at a time when oil is becoming very central to the world economy, and the Western powers want to control that oil. So this is a very quick summary. You know this history: 1939 to 1945, 6 million Jews perished in the Nazi organized Holocaust. 1946 to 1947, the Jewish Agency, which had now been established in Palestine, is organizing a number of terrorist organizations, outright terrorist organizations, the most well-known, the Stern Gang, Irgun, and especially Haganah, and then now begin to attack British and Palestinian targets. The 1948 Nakba, the war, Israeli terror, we know all of this. Nearly 800,000 Palestinians expelled, over 500 villages destroyed. The Zionists seize 80% of land, carry out widespread massacres, and Israel now establishes itself as a Jewish-only, exclusively Jewish state. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment, because the US president says, I'm a Zionist. If you criticize that it's a Jewish-only state, you are anti-Semitic. Think about that. Is there any other country in the world which is, for instance, a Christian-only state, a Buddhist-only state, a white-only state, whatever? So again, this is part of post-World War II world capitalist expansion. And as I mentioned, the centrality now of oil to world capitalism. And Israel now is going to become the platform and a staging point for world capitalist expansion and control in the Middle East. The June 1967 war will complete the occupation of remaining Palestinian lands. You ready to those historic maps? One more click, please. Yeah. And so Biden, this is why Biden, the Zionist anti-Semite, president of the United States, this is why he said in 1986, and has repeated, if there were no Israeli state, we would have to invent one. Because Israel is the key platform for world capitalism, and especially for Western colonialism and imperialism, to penetrate into the Middle East, but also remember what's going on here. There is the rise of Arab nationalism, socialism, massacre, etc. And so that has to be countered, and it's all going to be done through Israel. Next slide, please. So Israel is founded through terrorism, we know this, ethnic cleansing, massacres, summary executions, concentration camps, and even, as I pointed this out in our earlier event, you guys remember, even when you read the descriptions, and by the way, the Israeli historians are brilliant historians, even when they're Zionists, they're at least faithful to the actual record. And they even describe how the Zionists, when they're attacking and expelling these 800,000, destroying these 500 villages, they literally rip the jewelry off of the Palestinian women. Still working?
Just directed.
Okay. Literally go into the house, take all their furniture, their clothing, and share it amongst themselves. They rip the jewelry off of Palestinian women. Now, if you've seen films or if you've seen actual footage, you know that what the Nazis did. They would grab the Jews, kick them out of their house, send them to concentration camps, and they would enjoy their clothing, their jewelry, etc. An exact historic parallel here. There's a movie which recently came out, an excellent movie. I forgot his name, the Auschwitz concentration camp.
Zone of interest.
Zone of interest. And they show historically accurate scenes that the German family there, every day the head of the SS there running the Auschwitz camp, he goes literally next door. You can see the camp next to their house. But he brings home from the Jews his clothing and his jewelry, gives it to his wife, and they share it amongst themselves. So this is what the Zionists did. So we have to ask the question, and then we have to answer it. How could it be that Jews who suffered the Holocaust embraced the ideology and political project that is a close cousin of Nazism, conducive to the genocide which is now taking place? And this is what we call the Holocaust industry. The Zionists manipulate and weaponize Jewish grief and suffering and memory of the Holocaust. So this is a form of profound trauma manipulation. And here I want to emphasize, Jews are as much a target of this Zionist campaign as are non-Jews. The strategy here, the Zionists have to make Jews feel, one, there is an existential threat. Secondly, that threat can only be protected by blind defense of the Israeli state. Third, you have to inculcate a siege mentality. And fourth, of course, you have to dehumanize Palestinians and critics of Zionism as representing that existential threat. This is the power of the Zionist narrative, backed, of course, by the United States, who crumble otherwise. The power over the Jewish American community. You're asking why does somebody, the data right now is that 2/3 of Jewish Americans fully backing Israel. They've been historically manipulated as well by this narrative in a different way than general members of the public. So that's Zionism's Holocaust industry strategy. And it has to be masked by inculcating a psychopathic victimhood complex. However, remember 2/3, 1/3, and growing, especially young people, young Jews, anti-Zionist Jews are now leading this struggle against genocide. Think of Jewish Voices for Peace. Think of Never Again Now. Think of the American Council for Judaism. All of these are anti-Zionist Jewish organizations that are in the streets leading this struggle. My students, they set up an encampment at UCSB about 8 or 9 days ago. They fear that there's going to be a police attack very soon. Many of them are Jewish. All the other encampments. I have to, now we're going to move on to the second part of the conclusion of the presentation. But before I do that, I want to say something. Joshua here, my former students, comrade, he's been in the streets 7 months now. He's Jewish Mexican. And in our last event that we had, in our last event, he made a comment, excuse me, I hope I'm not embarrassing you, but he made a comment saying, well, this is the Palestinian youth, they're leading this struggle. And my response to him at the time was, no, it's them and it's you and it's all of us. But also my response is that any fight back here in the United States has to confront the ironclad hold that Zionism has had over the Jewish American community. And Joshua's in the absolute lead of that, along with all the others. So I want to turn, this is where Joshua and Chris asked me to go into more detail on this. So I want to turn to the political economy of Israeli genocide and ask the question, why genocide? Why now? What next? And cover 6 things. Israel's demographic crisis, Palestinian proletariat and surplus humanity, what I call militarized accumulation, global war economy. 4th, how what we're seeing now is violently cracking open new space for transnational capitalist expansion in Gaza. 5, the global student Palestine solidarity intifada, which is underway as we speak. And conclude with the question, what is at stake in Israel in the Israeli-US genocide? Because there is a larger meaning and warning for all of humanity here. Next slide, please. So, and I discovered that there's a top line, which is okay. I don't think we can adjust it. It's okay. Okay. There's a top line which is keeping on getting cut off. But here is the demographic crisis that Israel faces. So Israel says it's a Jewish-only state, and if that's going to be legitimated, Jews have to be the majority in Palestine, in historic Palestine. And so each time Palestinians threaten to be a majority, you have new rounds of ethnic cleansing, of intensified repression and occupation. Constantly, we're seeing this. In recent years, there's been an out-migration of Israeli Jews, very little in-migration. In 1992, when the Soviet Union collapsed, 1 million Soviet Jews poured into Israel. That was the last major in-migration. And now the population is diminishing. Palestinian birth rate is higher also than the Jewish birth rate. He's like, I'm leaving, you can see departures, out-migration of Israel. So that demographic crisis is deepening because, again, it's part of the legitimating ideology of this project. So demographic pressures have contributed. October 7th, the Hamas attack takes place. The full-scale genocide now begins. But we have to see what happened in the 1.5 to 2 years prior. This demographic crisis was deepening. And as this crisis was deepening, it generated a political climate for the rise of extreme fascist right government in Israel. And that government was already beginning genocidal tendencies. It was already beginning to so-called resolve the Palestinian problem by a radical escalation of settlements in the West Bank and of attacks on Palestinians. So that was going on anyway. Second, next. Oh, so this is, I took the photo down to the left. This is the Palestinians being expelled into what's today the West Bank. This was the encampment, the refugee encampment they set up. And that's the refugee encampment in 2015 when I was in Bethlehem and took that photo. But here's the thing. International law says that all those refugees going back to 1948 have a legal right by international law to return and get just compensation. But of course, the Jewish state would collapse if the refugees return because you have 7 million Jewish Israelis, you have 7 million Palestinians, including the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and inside Israel itself. And you have, of course, 6 million Palestinians in the diaspora. But that 7 and 7 is the key thing. It's 51% Palestinian, 49% Jewish right now. And again, the Palestinian population is increasing, the Jewish is decreasing. So this builds up genocidal tendencies even further, even before October 7th. Next slide, please. Let's skip over this for time. Second of these 6 concluding points, Palestinian proletariat as surplus humanity. So let me elaborate what I'm getting at here. There's 2 types of racist structures that we analyze in sociology. One of them we call disorganization of the working class and super exploitation of one sector of the working class. So historically in the United States, to take the binary, well, we don't need to take the binary. There's a working class, which is multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural, etc. But within that working class, 2 big sectors have been racially separated and super exploited, Blacks and Chicanos. So it's a single working class, but you disorganize the working class, you racially subordinate certain sectors, they can be super exploited, super controlled through racial oppression combined with working exploitation of workers. That's one racist structure. The other type of racist structure we analyze is what's known as exclusion. So you racially separate that population where you don't need their labor. The colonizers in North America needed the labor of Blacks and later on Chicanos. But the colonizers did not need the labor of Native Americans, of Indians, only their resources. So they're subject to genocide from 20 million to 300,000. That's the second type of racist structure, we call it exclusion. Now, in the case of Israel, you have this permanent tension since 1948 up until now. You've had the tension in the sense that Palestinians are expropriated. Their land is transferred to settlers, to Jewish settlers. But their labor is still needed. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians go from the West Bank into Israel to work in construction and services, in agriculture, etc. But that's in tension with the Zionist project. So the other side of that, because this calls for expropriation, exclusion, is ethnically cleanse the Jewish state, get rid of the Palestinians, either through genocide or through expulsion. The other side of that tension is expropriation, super exploitation. And this tension has been permanent from 1948 to the present. But now that starts to change in 1993. Of course, the Oslo negotiations, which were never about peace, never about Palestinian rights, that's another story. 1993, Israel imposes its closure policy on the West Bank. Closure meaning that we're now going to lock them in a giant supermax prison, the entire West Bank. And Israel begins a change in strategy, slowly diminishing the dependence on Palestinian labor and switching to importing transnational migrant labor from other parts of the world, from India, from Sri Lanka, from China, from the Philippines, from Ethiopia and other parts of North Africa, from Kenya, etc., from Pakistan, etc. And to slowly get rid of Palestinian workers so you resolve that tension in favor of expropriation, exclusion, genocide. And that has been accelerating in the 21st century and accelerating in the last few years. I did a little bit of research for a recent article that I published. the amount of transnational migrant workers in Israel, depending on how we count undocumented workers, just like the US, by the way. US economy would collapse without migrant workers, documented, but especially undocumented. Same thing in Israel. So between 300,000 and 600,000 transnational migrant workers to replace Palestinians so Palestinians can be genocided. And now, of course, if you're a migrant from the Philippines, 2 years, 3 years working on agricultural plantations in Israel or in construction, you're not going to demand political rights in that state. You're not going to demand lands, but Palestinians are. You want to get rid of the Palestinians. So this has built up these tremendous pressures for genocide. Hamas did or did not do whatever Hamas did or did not do on October 7th, the genocide was coming anyway. That's why I started beginning that this moment would have come. Take note, please. The Hamas attack, it killed Filipinos, Thais, Nepalese. And then a number of the people taken into Gaza are also transnational migrant workers. That's a real tragedy. And not one word in the global media. Maybe a lot of journalists don't know that, but others do. So this is part of a larger story. How do the ruling groups deal with surplus humanity that you don't need, that you're in the way of your domination, of your exploitation of your lands, of your control? Worldwide, the International Labor Organization reports that 1/3 of the global working age population is structurally unemployed, expelled from the global economy. So all over the world, the ruling groups have to say, how do we deal with the rising tide of surplus humanity? Why more and more people are moving from integration into this global system into being surplus and excluded? That's another story for elsewhere or for discussion afterwards. But the fact I'm getting at here is that all over the world, the ruling groups have this problem, and the danger here is they turn to the Gaza option. Gaza is a real-time alarm bell. Genocide is a political tool for resolving ruling class problem of surplus humanity. That is another reason why what happens to Palestine happens to all of humanity. This is an attack against all of us. So look at this. Let me show you what you're looking at here. That's Gaza. You've seen this in the news. Where do you think that is? Not the US, but headed towards this. That's El Salvador. El Salvador. So the similar problem in Central America and all over the world. Masses of surplus humanity have no other way to even survive. They're useless for the system. Okay. So the occupied territories, and especially Gaza, a giant supermax prison for surplus humanity, serving as a model for other countries. Already, China, Brazil, Thailand, they've all announced we're going to create supermax prisons, 40,000 prisoners here. So all of Gaza, we know, is an open-air concentration camp. A supermax prison for surplus humanity expelled by Zionists, no use whatsoever for these ruling elites. Next one, please. So third of these 6 concluding points. This is what I termed in my global police state book, militarized accumulation and accumulation by repression. So the larger story here is that global capitalism is in a very deep crisis. It's multidimensional, but let's just look at the economic and the political side. Politically, global capitalism is facing what we call a severe crisis for Jews. People all over the world cannot survive. 1% of humanity controls 52% of the world's wealth as we speak. 20% controls 95% of the world's wealth. 80% of humanity have just 5% of the world's wealth. People cannot survive in the system. All over the world, people are looking at their governments as no longer legitimate, no longer meeting their needs. That's what we call a crisis of political legitimacy. And then people start to rebel against the system or against their governments. And so that's what the ruling groups, they have to say, how do we deal with that rebellion? How do we deal with this lack of legitimacy? That's the political part of the crisis. The economic part of the crisis is what, in technical terms, we call a crisis of overaccumulation, but basically that means a crisis of chronic stagnation, of chronic low growth rates, and capitalism has to constantly expand outward. So capitalism right now doesn't have where to build new markets, where to have new investment opportunities. And they look at Gaza and say that's prime real estate. And there's oil that's been discovered there, and there's gas that's been discovered there. And we need to get at that. The only problem is Palestinians in Gaza stand in the way. We got to get rid of them. So the largest story here is what I call global police state. This instrument to resolve this political problem of global capitalism. How do you deal with rebellion, mass repression and control, genocide? How do you deal with the economic problem of the crisis of global capitalism? You have to violently crack open new spaces for investment, for expansion, and get rid of the people that stand in the way, which in this case is Palestinians in Gaza. So there's a larger story here to this global war economy. And Israel, its entire economy, the bedrock of the Israeli economy, is the global military industrial surveillance homeland security complex. Israel is a totally militarized economy, a totally militarized society. The IDF is the very backbone of the Israeli economy and the Israeli political and social system. And in case you didn't know this, I believe you did, but I'm going to say it, I want to reiterate it. Israel exports all over to the world its weapons systems, its social control systems. It wouldn't survive without that. And as it's doing so, it backs dictatorships and military regimes and authoritarian regimes all over the world. It backed and sponsored apartheid in South Africa. It helped the apartheid regime develop nuclear weapons. There was a genocide in Guatemala. I don't know if anyone is Central American here. A genocide against the Mayan indigenous in Guatemala in the 1980s by a military regime that was not just sent weapons to by Israel, but Israeli advisors went in and advised the Guatemalan army to practice genocide. Same thing in Colombia, same thing in every military regime and dictatorship around the world. So the Zionists, they have a lot of practice in this. And where do they get the practice? By testing their weapon systems and their social control and their repression on Palestinians in the occupied territories. This is why also, by the way, with the military speculation, how do you turn the problems of global capitalism into a way of making money, turn repression into profits, and get rid of surplus humanity? Well, that's why, before we even get to this, when the war broke out, Russia invades Ukraine. That's a tragedy for the people of Ukraine. It's a tragedy for the people of Russia. It's a tragedy for the people of the world. But no, it's not a tragedy for these transitional corporations, the military industrial complex, the tech corporations and the banks that are linked with it. On the contrary, it's a wonderful opportunity. Massive profit making at a time of stagnation, of low growth. That is why one of the leading consultants for all of these military industrial complex firms quoted her in an article I wrote after Russia invaded. She said, "Happy days are here again." Morgan Stanley, the giant global financial conglomerates, their spokesperson, when this genocide begins post October 7, said the Gaza war is good for our portfolio. Exact quote. So as this global economy stagnates, genocide becomes enormously profitable and attractive. It resolves political and economic problems for the ruling classes, which is, again, why this struggle is the struggle of all of humanity. Next slide, thank you. So social control, repression, warfare, genocide is enormously profitable and politically useful for a global capitalism that is in crisis. Israel is a model of the global police state. Do you wonder why? You should not anymore wonder why is it that Israel trains U.S. police departments? Why U.S. police love the IDF? When the attack took place on April 30th against the students at UCLA, I'm sure many or maybe everyone in the room has seen those horrible scenes, these fascist brown shirts. Fascist forces invaded the encampment of the peaceful students and for 5 hours beat them. Sent 100 of them to the hospital, 25 serious injuries. The police pulled back, laughed and joked. We believe that some of them were IDF and former IDF, and they're working together, of course, with the LAPD. So this is the picture I took in Hebron. Of course, that's the checkpoint where all the settlers can go, and that's an image of global police state. This is settler graffiti. You're reading right if you see the words, gas the atoms. Again, Zionism, Nazism, they're born of the same womb. Next one, please. So what's going on here is what I term global green zoning, and Palestine becomes the model for the global police state inside and outside of Palestine. What was the green zone? When the US invaded Iraq and occupied in 2003, they set up this green zone in the middle of that. Inside the green zone were the US military and political occupiers. The transnational corporations poured in to get Iraqi resources, set up their corporate headquarters there. The new Iraqi elite, brought to power by the US invasion, set up their new condominiums and their new houses and swimming pools, shopping malls, cinemas, all in the green zone. A steel reinforced concrete. Oh gosh.
No,
Oh,
the light.
okay. Steel reinforced concrete barriers, no one can get in, no one can get out. And that's where the new privileged elite are. And over here, you had utter destruction and misery and hundreds of thousands of people dying. So the whole world is green something because 20% of humanity is 95% of the world's wealth. This is LA as well. Here's the rich parts of LA protected by global police state. And here, a protest repressed by global police state. Next slide, please. What are you looking at here is green zones and gray zones. The outside of the green zones and the gray zones. The reason I'm going into all of this is because Israel is not only the model, but this is where Israel is constructing and saying to the ruling groups around the rest of the world, here, follow our lead, we'll help you set it up. This is all Iraq here. These are the new condominiums going up in the green zone after the invasion, and the Israelis they enjoy. Here's the gray zone, the massive humanity. These barriers with the global police state protecting you. This is the outside. Iraqis protesting. They can't get into the green zone. Total destruction outside of the green zone. That's what awaits them. So we're moving towards fortress worlds. Extreme unprecedented global inequalities. And once again, that requires a global police state to reproduce, to protect. And Palestine is the model. Here's the green zone, here's the global police state, Palestinians, surplus humanity all over the world. So this is facial recognition technology. We now have a panoptic global surveillance system with new digitalized modalities of mass control. So this is obviously, okay, picture is taken from China. Chinese have developed the most sophisticated facial recognition systems and sold them to Israel to apply in the West Bank. And of course, it was operational and being implemented right here in Los Angeles. So this is the sophisticated digitalized face of the global police state being tested in the West Bank and implemented in the West Bank. That was the previous photo of me standing in front of the entrance of the Hebron. But this is the quote that you cannot see, but I'm going to read it. Okay. This is a tweet that Mossad is the Israeli CIA. They tweeted this about 9-10 days ago to us on our campuses. The tweet says, again, this is Mossad, outright telling us, facial recognition can determine whether you participated in pro-Hamas protests at universities. Your jobs and your degrees will be worthless. Your hiring opportunities will be limited. And quote. Our fate is bound up with the fate of Palestine. We defend Palestine, we're defending ourselves. Fourth of the 6 concluding points. Again, this system needs to crack open new spaces for transnational capitalist expansion. They're running out of space for expansion. Enormous pressures build up of violent expansion throughout the Middle East and the world. So genocide in Israel, in Palestine, becomes what we call technically in sociology, primitive accumulation. Meaning you have to get at new resources, get at new lands, get at people out of the way. So the limits to expansion must be overcome by technology to death and destruction that we see in Palestine. Now, a little story here very quickly about capitalist globalization in the Middle East. Starting in the 1990s, there's a massive integration of all of the Middle East into world capitalism under the neoliberal model, social austerity, the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer and poorer, and growing inequality. That's what sparked the Arab Spring of 2011. Those uprisings, which sadly did not really move the mass of the Middle Easterners forward. But part of that globalization of the Middle East is that Israeli capitalists and the wealthy integrate with Arab capitalists and wealth. And they now have economic integration and share the same class interests, although they have political differences, which are quite minor. The ruling groups, look at the government of Jordan as an ally, the government of Egypt are allies of Israel. That's the government, not the masses of people in those countries. Okay, but what I'm getting at here is that you have now massive transnational corporate investments throughout the Middle East, in Israel and out of Israel, integrating the whole region, the ruling groups with their capital, integrating into new financial corporate investment in energy, tourism, high-tech, construction, infrastructure, finance, luxury consumption, the sovereign wealth funds of the Gulf states, massively integrated with Israeli capital, and they have the same interests. That is why the what is it called again? The Abraham Accords are signed in 2020. The Abraham Accords established normalized diplomatic relations between Israel, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait. The next and big step was to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Why are they normalizing political relations? Because they have the same economic interests. And they were allowed to do that. That was supposed to take place in early October. Hamas appeared on the scene. Palestinian resistance appeared on the scene. So that's temporarily suspended. But that is the larger story here. So what's going on is more than old-fashioned settler colonialism. It's the faith of the global capitalist system that can only now reproduce through bloodshed, through dehumanization, through genocide. So we see around the world escalating geopolitical confrontation. We see wars over resources, state competition, in response to capitalist crisis and collapse, wars to contain mass revolt from below, wars to make profits. So I previously quoted the two left ones in Ukraine. I quoted the military industrial complex saying happy days are here again. And of course, this is Gaza on the right. Next one, please. So we see these transnational wars by global capitalist states to siege resources. Tragically and terribly, what's going on in the Congo, significant parallels which was going on in Palestine. This is one of the most richest regions of the entire planet for mineral wealth. You have oil, gas, lead, zinc, copper, cobalt, coltan, gold, tin, diamonds, and much more right in this little area. There's only one so transnational mining interests and financial interests are pouring into that region of the Congo. This is just the last few months. 7 million people displaced from that region. Why? They're just standing in the way, surplus humanity. So once again, Palestine is a model and an example of what might happen and is happening elsewhere as well. Palestine, Congo, same historic context. So you recognize the Nazi Zionist here, of course, but you might not be able to see his map. And he went to the United Nations and gave his address to the annual General Assembly just days before, I forget the exact date, literally days before October 7th. And he held up that map in which you see no Palestinian territory, no West Bank, no us. You just see in Israel, which of course is Zionist project to take over all of that. But what he's also showing here on his next map that he holds up is this. That this is the Israeli and the transnational corporate plan. In overland and sea routes right through Gaza. Palestinians stand in the way of this global capitalist economic project. So transnational capital accumulation through genocide followed by a new round of extractive industrial, financial, and commercial investment. This is what has these transnational ruling groups so excited about getting rid of genocide of the Palestinians. Gas, oil. You know that Jared Kushner, you know, he was the son-in-law of Trump. He already had meetings that were publicized. You must have seen that in the news, in which he's just calmly and naturally explaining, yeah, we're getting ready to buy real estate and sell prime real estate in us. I mean, just normally, like genocide's just normal. It's what we're going to do because we're going to profit. And here it is. Next one, please. So Palestinians and surplus humanity standing in the way of major global capitalist expansion. Here you can see that this plan has been revived, the Ben Gurion Canal, because there's too much traffic here, it's slowing down global trade. There was a big ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal in the midst of the pandemic and blocked up global trade for several weeks. You might remember that. I think it was 2021. So this plan has been revived, another canal going right through Gaza. And of course, the Palestinians stand in the way. This was Israeli, October 2023, Ministry of Intelligence report calling for the transfer of all Gazans to the Sinai. but not just Gazans go out of Israel to Sinai, West Bank Palestinians supposed to go into Jordan. The quote unquote, we can call it the final solution that the Zionists want to implement. So I think this is my second to last slide. Finally, this is what sixth of the 6 points. Global Palestine solidarity, intifada, what's taking place right now. We're seeing an unprecedented crackdown. I've never seen such incredible repression. Previously, if I saved my job because of the solidarity, people in solidarity with me saved me from getting fired. But previously, we never saw tenured professors for putting a social media post, for signing a petition against genocide. Tenured professors being fired all over the United States. What happened at UCLA? First, the brown shirts. And then the next day, the police. The governor the next day, that was April 30th, the attack, 5 hours. The next day, the governor announces, our governor here, a Democratic governor, announces, I'm condemning the students for their violence last night, and I'm calling on the police to remove them. And the police go in and get round number 2. But why am I saying all of this? This unprecedented crackdown. Why? Because the solidarity is unprecedented. The world is waking up, no longer falling for the Zionists, for this colonialism, for this apartheid. And like a wild beast, the Zionists are cornered and they're lashing out in an unprecedented way, with the full backing and sponsorship of the US government, the German government, the UK government, especially those 3. That Zionist narrative is cracking. US policy is threatened by this. So Israel and the US control the military battlefield. There is no way to militarily defeat the Zionists. However, they already lost the battle for political legitimacy. They already lost this. The universities, as Joshua pointed out in his introduction, have been ground zero for Palestine solidarity. And these university administrators that are sending in police to crack the heads of our students, they're not acting alone. We saw at the beginning with that little YouTube, that short YouTube. The highest level of the Israeli state is coordinating with the US Department of Justice, the US Department of Education, and the State Department for this crackdown. And that little bit extract from the YouTube, it didn't even quote the whole document. The document said this operation will not make visible the role of the Israeli government. So this is a covert operation. That's where the repression is coming from, not from chancellors, as you say. They're doing the dirty. So the larger story here is that universities are a brain trust for the military-industrial complex, for tech capital, for financial capital. If you're a military-industrial corporation, you want war and genocide against Palestine because it's profitable. You need to develop new military technologies. You have some of your own laboratories, but mainly you finance engineering departments, physics departments. You give new money to the university to do the research. So there's a larger story here, but I'm simplifying. The point is that the universities now are tightly woven into the corporate complex, which is deeply invested in Israel, in genocide, in Zionism. And so when you challenge on your campuses the Zionist narrative, you're challenging these US foreign policy interests, these transnational corporate interests. And that's what's coming against us. Endowments are major outlets for accumulating and investing capital, in turn invested in Israel and the Middle East. So the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement is a threat, not just to Zionism, but to the transnational corporate order. Palestine solidarity, therefore, has to be criminalized. So you now have an anti-Semitism awareness act. Okay. Now, if you haven't already been shocked, nothing can shock you like this. Palantir CEO, his name is Alex Carr. Who's Palantir? One of the giant multi-billion-dollar high-tech corporations that recently signed an agreement with the IDF to supply the technology for its AI-driven genocide against Gazans. The CEO about 3-4 days ago, he said, and I'm quoting him, "We think college campus protests are a sideshow." No, they are the show. If we lose the intellectual battle, we will not be able to deploy any army in the West, ever. This is the corporation, which again is supplying the AI technology for genocide in Gaza. And they're saying, no, get the college students. I think there's one more slide. So, two more actually, but the last one didn't change. And so, the global future is at stake in Palestine. The battle lines are being drawn in the Middle East that reflect these global battle lines. October 7th is what we call a catalytic event. It catalyzed all of this. Will Israel become a model of how the ruling groups deal with global surplus humanity? Is this going to be a model for global genocide? Unprecedented global inequalities, I mentioned them already. Our task now is to deepen our attack against the Zionist narrative, our solidarity with Palestine. And part of that must involve linking the anti-genocide struggle to working class struggles everywhere, to the unions. Imagine if the unions were on board, the workers at the docks, they would not look at military hardware to be shipped to Israel. So we need a student worker alliance. The United Oil Workers has organized academic workers, graduate students who are teaching assistants, and other members of the academic community, not the undergraduates. And there's going to be a vote, I believe it's Tuesday or Wednesday, whether the UAW academic workers in California will go on strike to protest the Zionist genocide. This could not be more important. That's the qualitative step forward that we need. The ruling classes, they fear mass uprisings. A global revolt has been underway. Unrest is escalating everywhere. Mass disaffection is simmering right below the surface. The whole world is a tinderbox. The ruling classes are preparing for these uprisings by criminalizing Palestine solidarity. This repression is a dress rehearsal of mass repression elsewhere, for fascism here in the United States. So the global correlation of political and class forces, it hangs in the balance right now. A successful genocide will then move on to elsewhere. Beating it back will help save us, humanity. I want to say in parallel here with World War II. People say that World War II began in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Well, formally it did. But the actual real battle was 3 years before that. 1936 to 1939 was the Spanish Civil War. There were Republicans, Democrats, I don't mean capital R's and capital D's, small d, people that believed in democracy. Republicans meaning they stood for the Spanish Republic. Communists, socialists, anarchists, they all came together to fight against fascism in Spain. They lost that battle. It was only that defeat of this fascism in Spain, in the Spanish Civil War, that paved the way for World War II and that unspeakable destruction. So we're at that crossroads right now. The Spain of 2024, in global battle lines, is God's Palestine of 2024. So that's where we're at. The final slide is just an image to conclude with. Palestine is a symbol of popular rage and global intifada against the status quo, the global status quo. So that's where it ends. We can open up to the discussion.
For the sake of our recording here, I'm going to come around if you have a question or comment that you'd like to make. And we may run a few minutes over 8 o'clock, so I apologize for that. Professor, one thing I'd like to just comment, some of us recently had a march through Caltech. And the students at Caltech have had significant repression put on their rights to free speech. But Caltech seems to be one of those places that has especially strong contacts with the Israeli military-industrial complex. Would you like to comment on that any further?
Well, I only add that, yes, I've seen that horrible repression. Well, that's, again, this link between US universities and centers for research and development of technologies, and its linkage to the IDF and to the other part of the Israeli economy, also is high tech. So the Israeli economy, it used to be industry and agriculture. And then starting in the 1980s, 1990s, now that whole economy is replaced by two sectors: military, industrial, security, complex, and high tech, and they're fused. So it's not surprising that our own the technologies developed on our campus is so linked with Israel.
There was one question that came in on the chat. Why is Israel the bastion of capitalism in the region? Why not, for example, Saudi Arabia or any other country that could have been the U.S. capitalist public or what?
Absolutely. So that's a fantastic question, and that's absolutely the case. The case is that the ruling groups in the Middle East, they are all integrated into the circuits of global capitalism. Often, absolutely, and they are all these again. The Gulf regimes, they're not on the side of Palestinian masses. They have to pay lip service. Their populations are already revolting against them, but they're deeply on the side economically of Israel, of the United States, of the West, of this global capitalist system. And absolutely, that the role of the US has been to resolve any political differences among all of these regimes representing global capitalist interests so that they can more fully defend their common class interests. So absolutely, the US, at the same time that the US just approved $26 billion more for Israel, also approved this massive military aid package. I don't remember the amount for Saudi Arabia. There's a larger story here. Again, there's just so much we can cover in 2 hours. But Saudi Arabia, just like Israel was dependent on and still is dependent on Palestinian labor, but now switching over to transnational migrant labor. If you ate strawberries today, if you had a salad, whatever it is, it was undocumented. Some Mexican and Central American labor picked it. The U.S. economy would collapse. The Israeli economy would collapse. I spoke about that. But what I didn't speak about is all of those Gulf states. They have millions and millions of workers that are basically virtually slaves from other countries, from Sri Lanka, from the Philippines. No citizenship rights, no civil rights, no political rights. Going back to Saudi Arabia, I don't know how many Saudi citizens there are, and there's 4 Saudi citizens, but the lowest of the lowest are all of these transnational migrant workers, including, I believe the figure is, don't quote me on this because we have to Google it to check, but I believe there's about 700,000 Ethiopian workers in Saudi Arabia. So there'd be no oil industry, there'd be no service economy, nothing without these migrant workers. So about a year ago, before October 2nd, another group of Ethiopian migrants was making their way overland into Saudi Arabia looking for employment, just like the zone of death here is the US-Mexico border, where surplus humanity tries to come in. The zone of death is the Mediterranean, where thousands die, just trying to survive. So these Ethiopian migrants, they're migrating and they're trying to cross into Saudi Arabia. The Saudi border guard, opens fire on them, kills 100 of them in cold blood. Of course, no consequences. But what I'm getting at, whoever asked that question, it's a fantastic question. So if, the critique here is also of those Gulf states, the repression of their own people, their alliance with the Zionists, absolutely. But of course, right now, the genocide is against the Palestinians by the Zionists. So that's our, the focus.
In November of 20, I was in Santiago, Chile, and it was a conference on Christian Zionism. The Latin American academics and activists spoke to us, in addition to saying things about the impact of Christian Zionism there, said there were 3 ways that Israel was exporting dangerous things into their countries. Where the first was the weapon systems, drones that had been tested on Gazans and people in the West Bank. The second was the surveillance systems, Pegasus and things from Elbit and so on, that they were already experiencing from some, especially of the more authoritarian governments. And thirdly was the police and military tactics of the same sort of things that I've seen, and I'm sure you all have, on videos of police brutality at Emory, at Columbia, UCLA, USC, and elsewhere, of knees and throwing demonstrators on the ground, putting a knee in their back. And this is not only for Latin America, it's also Africa and Asia. It is indeed a global outreach on the part of what Israel is doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that comment, Gene. There's two things that I want to follow up on. One is, so what is the Zionist mass base? We know that the states and the capitalists, such as the Palestine CEO, we know what they're doing and why. But why is there this mass base for Zionism? Well, one is the Zionist manipulation, for instance, the United States and the Jewish American community, right? That we talked about, the Holocaust industry. The other mass base for Zionism among the population itself is Christian fundamentalists. And that's manipulated by the evangelical leadership, which is part of the Republican Party and the Democrats. But so the evangelical ideology is that before you can have a second coming of Christ, you have to have the resurrection of the Jewish kingdom, its consolidation, and then you can destroy that Jewish kingdom, and then you'll have the second coming of Christ. So the evangelicals, the far-right fundamentalist Christians, they're anti-Semites. That's what I was saying at the beginning of the talk, and yet they back Israel. That's point one. So that's why you see all around where this far-right Christian fundamentalism, you see it so much closely linked to Zionists and Israel. But the other point you're making, that's exactly what we were getting at. Pegasus, all of this, the Zionist Israeli state is a menace to all of humanity. Wherever you find dictatorship, wherever you find repression, wherever you find, bloody, brutal fascist police, you will find the span of Israel. And as long as you're talking about South America, all of those governments during the 1970s, military regimes came to power. In 1973, Pinochet carries out this bloody military overthrow of the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende. Who comes rushing in immediately, in addition to the United States, of course, is Israel, immediately. Anywhere you go. I can tell you scenes about Guatemala. I spent 20 years in Central America. Guatemala, the 300,000 Mayan indigenous genocide. The United Nations recognized it as genocide in the 1980s in Guatemala. And you see Israeli IDF soldiers and Mossad agents standing next to Guatemalan generals who are and telling them, do this, do that. These are the tactics of genocide. So wherever you see bloodstained humanity fighting genocide, including on our campuses, you see the stamp of this menace to humanity. And I want to repeat, with such a powerful propaganda machinery that innocently, many Americans here, tens of millions, think it's a nice democratic society being attacked by terrorists. This is why I'm saying this is the most powerful propaganda machinery on the planet. We know a military dictatorship in South America, right? We know bloody, tiny elites in the Congo just enriching themselves by selling their people out. But most people are fooled by this Hezbollah machinery.
Yeah. Recently, the international court found Israel guilty of war crimes, genocide, and issued arrest warrants to legitimate non-members. A series of Republican senators, Marco Rubio, Mark Blackburn, Cruz, right-wing Republicans were threatening sanctions against them for doing that. So I make a question: well, one, can you talk on the international court's position? Is it just a gesture? Is there some bigger intention that they have to hold them accountable, or are they sort of, they're not having power against them?
Great question. So here's the thing. The International Court of Justice and the ICC, the International Criminal, so these are two separate things. The International Court of Justice are both part of the UN system, right? With the International Court of Justice, you can take a state to the court, and then there will be a ruling against against a state. And then the ICC, you take individuals to court, right? Like generals or heads of state that have committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, violations of international law. But both of those instances, they don't have an enforcement capacity on their own. So the ICC ruling, which was the tentative ruling, the final one won't come out for 2-3 years, was that there's a plausible case for genocide. So the importance of that ruling, the ICC doesn't have troops to send in and intervene and stop the genocide. The ICC can't go in and arrest Netanyahu, but its importance is political, right? That's why I said Israel has already lost the battle for political legitimacy. And that's extremely, extremely important. That loss of political legitimacy is making for the Biden administration a political crisis. It's shaking up the whole US political system. We're living at this time. We don't know what the future holds, but that's why I said at the beginning of the talk, we are in a turning point. We're in uncharted territory. But going back to your question. That's the importance of the ICC rule, right? We use it to continue to deepen the struggle in solidarity with Palestine. Now, the ICJ. Now, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, on the one hand, is kind of a joke because they have put in jail people that have been brought to trial, such as, I forgot his name, Milenovic, I forgot his name, sorry, excuse me. The Serbian. Milosevic, thank you. Right, so some people are in jail, others are being brought to trial, the former Sudanese leader. But the real biggest criminals on the planet, the ones that run the US state, the ones that run the Israeli state, the German state, they're completely immune because any ICC ruling has to be backed up by the power of states. The ICC itself doesn't have troops to go in and get Netanyahu. So now the ICC, it's believed that they're going to have a ruling that Netanyahu is guilty of crimes against humanity and should be arrested and brought to trial. Of course, that would be fantastic. That's exactly how you define justice. Bring him to trial, lock him away. Actually, I think there should be more, but I won't go there. But here's the point. These US senators, exactly what you said, these US legislatures, they literally threatened the ICC, right? They said, we'll come after you if you issue a ruling. So the utter arrogance of the US state, the utter complete arrogance, right? So that's the battle we're facing, right? So, I mean, if the ICC issues this ruling, Kissinger, may he not rest in peace, but half the countries in the world he couldn't go to because he would have been arrested and put on trial, right, for war crimes, crimes against humanity. So if the ICC rules against Netanyahu, he will have to be very careful, but the US has his back. That's the problem. So that's what we're fighting.
So with the Zionist narrative crumbling, propaganda machine crumbling, and in turn, the American system crumbling, the American democracy is a fallacy, the two-party system is a fallacy. What do you make of this upcoming election season? As they still are bought out by this dystopian lobbying system that has bought them out. It's all backwards. We see it, we hear it. It's dystopian. They're still standing 10 toes on it. It's backwards. What do you make of this upcoming election?
Yeah, so there's the analytical comment and then the personal political comment, right? I mean, the analytical comment is, yes, the US political system is in a crisis of legitimacy. It's a turning point. We've had these two parties for decades and decades, but before them, there were other parties. After them, there will be other parties if humanity survives, if we survive. It's come to a crossroads, this crisis of legitimacy in both parties. It's cracking up, and that's why I say it's uncharted territory. And right now, the ruling groups, they don't know how to resolve this crisis. They don't know how to resolve the economic crisis, except they wage war, and war equals accumulation of capital. They don't know how to resolve the political crisis. They are clueless. The World Economic Forum, which meets in Davos once a year, they bring together the top cream of the global elite, the political elite, but mainly the transnational corporate elites. And they issued a report in their last meeting, their 2022 meeting, called the polycrisis of global capitalism. Now, this is the 2,000, 3,000 richest and most powerful people on the planet, literally on the planet. And they issued this report, the polycrisis of global capitalism, saying we're in crisis everywhere we turn. And they don't know how to resolve the crisis. So it's up to us to resolve it from below, in the longer picture, in the bigger picture, by overthrowing the system. I'm not advocating violence, I'm just saying overthrow the system. But here's the thing. So our challenge is, how do we take advantage of the crisis of legitimacy to push forward the agenda of social justice and popular empowerment, rather than having that space cracked open by the crisis of legitimacy for fascists to take over? That's the giant challenge. That's the crossroads we're at, and I don't have the answer. Now, the personal political comment is, I can't tell anyone how you should or shouldn't vote or anything like that, but I just can tell you, I would have a stomach ache for too many days, weeks, and months to vote for the Democrats. As far as Palestine, look, you can be a Republican and drop 2,000 pounds, give 2,000 pound bonds. You can be Democrat and do it. It's the same genocide. I mean, genocide, Joe, is not just a slogan. And I think his recent maneuvers to say that he's cutting off some of the shipments of weapons, well, I saw that 2 or 3 days ago. If we deepen the pressure, it might become real, but right now that's just pure rhetoric and nonsense. Absolute pure rhetoric and nonsense. So I don't have the answers politically, but it is the moment and the hour for us to, with everything we've got, to mobilize and push forward.
We have 2, maybe 3 questions here.
Yeah.
And also here.
You covered so much ground that you obviously couldn't cover everything, and you alluded to Ukraine, right? But I think it's really important for everybody to understand that there is another expansionist imperialist bloc in the world, which is China with Russia, with Iran, which is also at play in that region, and that these 2 big blocs are moving towards a head-on collision. And it's no accident that you ended your formal talk with the prelude to World War II, because I think right now we're in the prelude to World War III, which is global capitalism's historic way of resolving its crisis, economic crisis, and political crisis by mass destruction of people and everything else. And so I think what you just said about, yeah, we need to overthrow the system, and I'm not, I'll say, I think it is, we do need a revolution. I think it is possible. I think that working students start things, workers can finish it, but I think it would be a little foolish to rely on unions, which are pretty tied into the Democratic Party. But also on soldiers, because who is in the US military? It's overwhelmingly working class kids who saw no future, who maybe even think their own neighborhood is more dangerous than battlefield. And so I think that the discussion I think people need to have ongoing is revolution for what? What kind of society do we want to build on the ashes and the rubble of what this imperial system is leaving us? Because I think when people do see a future worth fighting for, I think they will, and I think we can, and I think we can take that future into our hands. And I think the information you provided is really useful for that. Thank you.
Yeah. I absolutely am not going to defend the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and I'm not going to defend the Chinese government. Those are all elites and ruthless rulers wherever you look in states around the world. But I will say this, it's not negating anything you said. Just when we talk about Palestine right here, right now, it's the US state. Right? It's the US state. Chinese capitalists, they provided that facial recognition system to the West Bank. They should be condemned. That's a crime. But the genocide right now against Palestine, right, is the US state is backing that, the German and the UK state. So I don't disagree with anything you said. Our defense of Palestine is the fight against the US state and its policy.
Hi, I actually think that you kind of answered my question with the last few questions, but I do just want to share that I am a UCLA student.
UCLA?
UCLA student, yeah, sorry, I moved my work, it's been a long week. And I was there, this is all new to me, and I've never done anything like this, but I was there every day and that night in the encampment, and I'm still trying to process all of that, and it's not stopping. Like, maybe this is just so wild, but I think part of my question is, I also work under the Vice Chancellor's office, and I'm currently striking, and that's new. I've never done anything like that either. But I think like. And not to make you feel bad, but I feel like I was scared before, and after your presentation, I'm like a little more scared, definitely, and that's real. But for those of us who are working to kind of burn this down, for lack of other words, what is some of your advice, like based on your experience? Because surveillance is real and retaliation is real, but also I'm in my final quarter there. And then my comrade here will begin his UCL experience in the fall. And so for him, what are some of your thoughts on like those students who will have to rebuild this?
Yeah, it's extremely, extremely important what you're saying. Your concerns are very, very real. As we saw, we get a tweet from Mossad. right? So yes, your concerns are very real. I would, and other people may also want to have ideas on that, but I think the first thing that comes to mind is there is safety in numbers. Right? The more there's mass solidarity, the more we have collective action with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of us, the safer each one of us are. Right? They can go after a few of us, they can identify some of the leaders. My students, I am so proud of my students right now, they are leading this encampment at UCSB. But they have better tactics than I'm already doxed publicly, and I don't care what happens to me, but they have had to, and you guys know this, they've had to develop these tactics where they communicate by signal, where they have proton mail, which is supposed to be more safe. It's a shame that we have to go semi-underground, the leaders of the organization. But as far as many of us participating in this Palestine solidarity, the more people that participate, the safer we are, because they can repress 2%, 3% of the students at UCLA that participate in this. But I don't know how many students, I think it's 29,000 at UCLA undergraduates. If there's 10, 15, 20% of the students or more, they can't all be subject to sanctions. It's too many. The whole university system collapses. So that's why our only defense is our mass struggle. I'm sorry I don't have a better response in terms of actual tactics and strategy, but instead of being like, obviously it's scary, right? But instead of being pushed back and being quiet, the more we mobilize massively, the better we're defending ourselves.
I don't have a question, but I have a couple of comments. Thank you for your presentation. First comment, I'm hoping people, you mentioned Google, and I'm hoping people do not go to Google for information, because Google fired a lot of their employees who were pro-Palestine. And myself as an IT, I do not recommend the internet as a source of information. You go to the Wikipedia and they're trying to rewrite history. So I recommend people read books or follow legitimate authors and research, number one. Number two, as a Palestinian from Gaza, who was born a refugee, I resist everything about the apartheid so-called state of Israel and the Zionists. And throughout your presentation, you keep using anti-Semite and the reference that it's against Jews. I do not subscribe to that narrative because Semitism is related to languages, related to people who speak languages. I'm an Arab, I'm a Semite. And I refuse for them to not only steal my land, steal my culture, steal my food, steal my clothes, and now they're stealing my identity. So this is something that we all need to educate ourselves about and reject, because that's how they brainwash everybody, by creating their own narrative that people subscribe to. And I refuse to subscribe to anything about their narrative.
Previously, back to your last question.
And what she had also.
Okay, well, two questions then. Please.
Sorry?
Hold on 1 second here.
I just wanted to make a comment. I really appreciate how you decided to Congo to the Palestine. Because from King Leopold to the death of Patrice Lumumba, the Congo has never had a chance to free our Palestinian people. And I just wanted to also comment on like Foucault's concept of imperial boomerang. And I know there's many undergraduate students here, we all don't like reading Foucault as social science students, but imperial boomerang is something that's happening right now in UCLA, in Columbia, and USC. And I just wanted to like point out, like we all have to find the language, the rhetoric, and the story to make our struggles interconnected with the Palestinian people.
Yeah, a quick follow-up on that. So for those of you that are not familiar with the concept of imperial boomerang, there's two comments. So the first is, and thank you for pointing it out because that's exactly what's happening. It's that the imperialists, they conquer and repress other peoples in the form of third world, around the world, and then it comes back to haunt the population from where that boomerang left. So when those police, beat students on our campuses, That's the imperial boomerang coming back to ourselves right here mobilizing. That's first. The second, you can discuss imperial boomerang without discussing Foucault because he didn't actually invent that concept. It was no, it was Aimé Césaire from the Caribbean. And he was the one that pointed out that the Nazi genocide, the Nazi fascism was simply the European colonial boomerang coming back to Europe itself. So Foucault jumped on that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for this amazing discussion. We would love to repeat it again with also different other people soon. The question is, we've been struggling for the last 76 years. We've been struggling for the last 76 years, and we feel injustice all these years, not only after September 11, October 7, and after the genocide in Gaza. We see this genocide, it was 1948, but it wasn't like social media to show the whole world what's going on and what's happening to Palestinians. My question is, as you know, we know what's happening and what Israel did every single day on the ground. But the thing, how are we going to stop the United States to support Israel and to fund them and to be part of the genocide? We've been talking about Israel, the genocide for all life, and we know that. But the most important thing, the country that we are citizens on it, and it's the most supportive for Israel. I don't know if you could answer me how we could support that, what's happening. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, of course, and that's why I started way back at the beginning of the talk saying that the US government can stop this genocide in 24 hours if it wanted, but actually it's sponsoring it. So that's our real challenge, and the special responsibility of those of us that live in the United States, whether we're citizens or not citizens, is to target the US government's sponsorship, not support. Sponsorship is a difference, right? Sponsorship of this genocide, of the Zionists. So, I mean, the way that we are doing that, we barely got started here, is to raise the political cost of that sponsorship so high that it costs more to do so than it costs to withdraw that sponsorship. Now, it's a harder task than changing US policy towards South Africa. So a little bit of history here. See, a lot of people in the room are my age, but a lot are also young. So, so the US backed, along with the UK especially, South African apartheid regime from 1948 until the apartheid came to power. 1948 until 1992. But in the mid-1980s, I was not in the United States, I was in Nicaragua. But what's going on in the United States is the mass movement on campuses and off campuses to force the US government to impose sanctions on South Africa, to withdraw its sponsorship of the racist minority regime in South Africa. That movement finally raised the pressure so much on the US state that the transnational corporations themselves said, okay, let's have a transition from a racial domination to a multiracial capitalism. Of course, many South Africans were fighting even against capitalism, but the point is that it became too costly politically for the US state to continue to back apartheid in South Africa. Right now, there's two challenges. One is to stop the genocide, struggle for Palestinian freedom. The second challenge is much more long-term. It's to change this whole global system. But I want to focus on the first challenge because right now the genocide is taking place. Right? And there we have to raise the political cost of the US state so it costs more politically to continue to support genocide and Zionism than it costs to bring about a change to a democratic and free Palestine. Right? So that's the strategy. So, you know, we talk about strategy is what should be vision. That's the route. We have to continue exactly what we're doing and escalate. Right? And then there's tactics. Tactics is exactly how do you achieve that strategic objective. And there we all discuss, you know, there's the campus struggle, there's the struggle in the streets, there's elections, there's political education like here, or, you know, everything we're doing. But you're absolutely right. You know, to conclude, I guess we're out of time, but to conclude, the real struggle, we're struggling against whatever you want to call it, the Zionist entity, that monster there. But that is a struggle against the US state and its sponsorship of that monster.
I have I have one additional question. Chris Marin helped to bring you here, and so I'm giving him the chance to ask his last question to last.
Thank you so much for that. It was really great. You know, when we start to look at this situation, and it is scary, it's very scary, but it can also be an opportunity to look at ourselves. And we want to fight this scary thing that's coming at us, but we also have to take a moment and realize how are we participating in this? You know, because we can protest, we can have BDS movements, but if we keep buying into the system, we're fighting ourselves. And so I wonder how we can look at ourselves in this situation and correct what we have going on here, because our political realities are a projection of our society. And just how you brought up the migrant workers, we're all participating, you know, and we have a microcosm of this here that reflects onto a big scale. And when we talk about revolution, revolution isn't a destination, it's a process, it's a way of life. Like Fred Hampton said, we should all wake up every day and say, I'm a revolutionary. We should all be participating in this and criticizing how we're involved. I guess one example would be, the conservatives historically would justify their greed and selfishness with moral tolerance. But what I see a lot with the liberals is they go, yeah, I'm against genocide, I'm against racism, and we start peeling back the layers to figure out what's going on. And as soon as they find that that layer is protecting them, they go, well, let's work from here up, because I don't want to mess up what I'm comfortable with. And they think that just by learning about it or exposing themselves, they're going to give up everything. Because we have mortgages, we have families, we can't give that up. But I would argue that we have to pull back all the layers, expose ourselves, cry together, heal together, and then work towards fixing it together. But we have to pull it all back and have that revolutionary mindset every day. And I'm wondering, just if you could maybe add to that.
Of course, this is so important, and this is the proper way to end this activity, because that's the larger question. That's what I was saying. There's two things going on simultaneously, right? One is the urgency, immediate urgency of fighting against genocide. But that is not delinked and cannot be delinked from the larger strategic vision of transforming society. 80% of US families live paycheck to paycheck and have $400 or less in savings. That means you lose your job, you cannot pay next month's rent, you're homeless, right? And we have to link, again, urgency is stop genocide, but we have to link that to all of these real life material social struggles of the vast majority of working poor people in the United States, right? And that's always been a problem, that we struggle, for justice and other, which we have to, that's our duty, all around the world, and we always have that challenge, which we can never neglect, to link it up to the struggle for survival of people right here in the United States, whether you're an undocumented immigrant, or we're working class and poor people. Exactly. That's why I was also saying that Student Worker Alliance, Anti-Genocide Worker Alliance, ultimately, the best defense of the masses of Palestinians who are workers in surplus humanity, surplus proletarians. Their ultimate defense is, a transnational worker struggle. That's our big strategic vision. And we can never let go of it. But while we're fighting for that strategic vision, we need to be clear that immediately this genocide has to be, curtailed.